Morning fog rolled in from Monterey Bay like a gentle whisper, wrapping around the small coastal town in its familiar embrace. Elena Rodriguez stood behind the gleaming counter of her restaurant, Coastal Dreams, watching the steam rise from her coffee cup as she reviewed the day's reservations. 8 years had transformed her from a struggling waitress into one of the town's most respected business owners. Her fingers traced the worn leather cover of her reservation book, a habit she'd developed during the lean years when every customer meant the difference between paying rent or facing eviction. Now, at 29, she owned not just the restaurant, but the entire building, complete with her apartment upstairs where she lived with her 7-year-old daughter, Sophia. "Mama, can I help with the flowers today?" Sophia appeared at her elbow, her dark curls bouncing as she hopped from foot to foot. The little girl had inherited Elena's determination, but possessed a lightness of spirit that sometimes made Elena wonder where it came from. "After your homework, sweetheart," Elena replied, smoothing her daughter's hair. "Mrs. Patterson is coming to tutor you in an hour." Sophia made a face but nodded obediently. She was advanced for her age, already reading at a 4th grade level, and Elena was determined to give her every opportunity she'd never had. The private tutoring was expensive, but Elena had learned to budget for the things that mattered most. The bell above the restaurant door chimed, and Elena looked up to greet the new customer with her practiced smile. The expression froze on her face as she recognized the man standing in the doorway, looking uncertain and somehow smaller than she remembered. David Chen looked exactly the same, yet completely different. His black hair was styled differently now, shorter and more professional, and his clothes spoke of success and money. But his eyes held the same warmth she remembered, the same gentle intelligence that had first drawn her to him all those years ago. "Elena," he said softly, his voice carrying across the restaurant like a prayer. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering against the floor in a spray of ceramic and liquid. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence that had fallen over the restaurant. Her staff looked up from their tasks, sensing the tension in the air. "David," she managed to whisper, her throat tight with emotions she thought she'd buried long ago. He stepped forward, then stopped, seeming to remember they were in a public space. "I heard about your restaurant. I wanted to see it." Elena's mind raced. David had left 8 years ago to pursue a startup opportunity in Silicon Valley, promising to return for her once he got established. The promises had faded to silence, then to nothing. She'd stopped checking her phone for messages that never came. Stopped hoping for a future that was never meant to be. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice stronger now, the business owner in her taking control. "I moved back last month," he said, his eyes taking in the restaurant's warm decor, the successful business she'd built from nothing. "I bought the old Henderson place up on the hill. I'm starting a new company, focusing on sustainable technology." Sophia chose that moment to return from the back room, her arms full of fresh flowers for the tables. She stopped when she saw the stranger, her natural curiosity overcoming her shyness. "Hello," she said politely, the way Elena had taught her to greet customers. David's breath caught in his throat. Elena watched his face change as he took in Sophia's features, the familiar curve of her smile, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. His eyes darted to Elena, wide with questions and dawning realization. "This is Sophia," Elena said carefully, her hand moving protectively to her daughter's shoulder. "Sophia, this is David. He's an old friend of Mama's." "Nice to meet you," Sophia said, extending her small hand with the formal politeness Elena had instilled in her. David shook it gently, his eyes never leaving the little girl's face. "She's beautiful," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "How old is she?" 7, Elena replied, her chin lifting slightly in defiance. "She'll be 8 in December." She watched him do the math, saw the moment understanding hit him like a physical blow. His face went pale and he gripped the back of a nearby chair for support. "Elena, I need to talk to you," he said urgently. "Privately." "I'm working," Elena replied coolly, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "Sophia, why don't you take the flowers to table 6? They just arrived." The little girl nodded and skipped away, humming under her breath. Elena watched her go, buying herself time to think. to prepare for the conversation she'd imagined having 1,000 times but never expected, would actually happen. "Please," David said, his voice low and desperate. "Just 5 minutes." Elena looked around her restaurant, at the life she'd built without him, at the daughter she'd raised alone. She thought of the nights she'd worked double shifts while pregnant, the times she'd counted every penny to make sure Sophia had what she needed, the birthdays and holidays she'd celebrated as a family of 2. "The office," she said finally, nodding toward a door marked "Private" behind the counter. They walked through the bustling restaurant in silence, Elena's heels clicking against the hardwood floor she'd saved for 2 years to install. The office was small but well organized, the desk covered in invoices and receipts, a computer showing her accounting software, and photos of Sophia at various ages decorating the walls. David stared at the photos, his breathing shallow. "She's mine, isn't she?" Elena closed the door behind them and leaned against it, her arms crossed. "She's mine," she corrected firmly. "I've raised her alone since the day she was born." "But I'm her father," he pressed, turning to face her. "Elena, why didn't you tell me? I had a right to know." Anger she'd kept buried for 8 years rose to the surface like a tide. "A right?" she repeated, her voice sharp. "You had a right when you promised to come back for me. You had a right when you said you loved me. You gave up that right when you disappeared without a word." "I didn't disappear," David protested. "I called. I texted. You never responded." "Liar," Elena said flatly. "After 6 months of unanswered messages on my end, I realized you'd moved on. I had to move on too." David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she remembered from their time together. "I was building something, Elena. I was trying to create a future for us. The company took off faster than I expected. There were investors, meetings, travel. I thought I was doing the right thing." "The right thing would have been to include me in those decisions," Elena shot back. "The right thing would have been to answer when I finally got the courage to call you and tell you I was pregnant." His face went white. "You called?" "Once," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I was 3 months along. Your assistant said you were in meetings all day and would call back." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "You never did." The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of misunderstanding and missed opportunities. Through the office window, Elena could see Sophia arranging flowers at a table, her tongue poking out in concentration, the way it did when she was focused on a task. "I would have come back," David said finally. "If I'd known about Sophia, I would have dropped everything and come back." "But you didn't know," Elena replied, "and I couldn't take the risk of being rejected again. I had a child to think about." David moved closer, his eyes pleading. "Let me make it right now. Let me be part of her life. Part of your life. I never stopped loving you, Elena. Not for a single day." Elena's heart clenched at his words, but she'd learned to protect herself and Sophia above all else. "It's not that simple, David. You can't just walk back into our lives and expect everything to be the way it was. Sophia doesn't even know who you are." "Then let me get to know her," he said. "Let me prove that I'm not the same man who left 8 years ago. I've changed, Elena. I've learned what really matters." Elena looked at him. This man who had once been her entire world, who had given her the greatest gift of her life even as he broke her heart. The boy she'd fallen in love with had grown into a successful man, but she could still see traces of the person she'd once known in his eyes. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This isn't just about me anymore. Sophia comes first, always." David nodded, understanding flickering in his expression. "Of course. But Elena, please don't shut me out completely. Give me a chance to show you who I am now." Before she could respond, a knock came at the office door. "Mama," Sophia's voice called. "Mrs. Patterson is here for my lesson." Elena opened the door, grateful for the interruption. Sophia stood there with her backpack, ready for her tutoring session. Behind her, Elena could see the elderly woman who came 3 times a week to help with Sophia's advanced coursework. "Go on, sweetheart," Elena said, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "I'll see you when you're done." Sophia nodded and skipped away, leaving Elena and David alone again. The moment felt charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. "I should go," David said, though he made no move toward the door. "But Elena, I meant what I said. I want to be part of this, part of her life. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for a chance." Elena watched him leave, her emotions in turmoil. Through the window, she could see him pause on the sidewalk, looking back at the restaurant one more time before walking away. She pressed her hand against the glass, feeling the cool surface against her palm. For 8 years, she'd built her life around the certainty that she and Sophia were better off alone. Now, in the space of one conversation, that certainty had been shattered like the coffee cup on the restaurant floor. The question was whether she was brave enough to let David back into their lives, or whether protecting her daughter meant keeping the past buried forever. 3 weeks passed before Elena agreed to let David see Sophia again. They met at the park on a Saturday afternoon, the autumn sun casting golden light through the trees. Sophia ran ahead to the playground while Elena and David sat on a bench, the awkward silence between them filled by the sounds of children laughing. "She's incredible," David said, watching Sophia climb the monkey bars with fearless determination. "You've done an amazing job raising her." "I had no choice," Elena replied, but her voice was softer now. Time and several late-night phone conversations had begun to thaw the ice between them. David had been patient. He'd sent flowers to the restaurant with no expectations. He'd respected her boundaries. He'd asked permission for everything. Slowly, carefully, he'd been proving that he meant what he said about changing. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you," David said, his voice suddenly serious. "Something I should have told you weeks ago." She turned to face him, her stomach tightening with unease. "What is it?" "When I came back to town, it wasn't random. I didn't just decide to move here." He took a deep breath. "I've known about Sophia for 6 months." The world seemed to tilt beneath her. "What?" "Last spring, I was at a tech conference in San Francisco. One of the vendors was from this area. He mentioned your restaurant, showed me pictures from his Instagram. There was a photo of you and Sophia at some community event." David's voice cracked. "The moment I saw her, I knew. I did the math. I knew she had to be mine." Elena stood up, her hands trembling. "You knew? For 6 months you knew and you didn't say anything?" "I was trying to figure out the right way to approach you," David said desperately, standing to face her. "I didn't want to just show up and destroy your life. I spent months planning my move back here, setting up the business so I'd have a reason to stay." "You lied to me," Elena said, her voice shaking with rage. "You stood in my restaurant and acted surprised. You looked at her like you were seeing her for the first time. You made me relive that whole moment of telling you. And it was all an act." "It wasn't an act, not the emotions. Seeing her in person, meeting her, that was real. But the surprise wasn't." Elena's eyes blazed. "You manipulated me, David. You came back here with a plan, and you played me like I was some kind of game. That's not fair." "Fair?" Elena laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about fair? I was 19 and pregnant and alone. I worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. I gave up college, gave up my dreams, gave up everything for her. And you were out there building your empire, knowing you had a daughter you'd abandoned." "I didn't know for 8 years," David protested. "I didn't abandon her on purpose. But you did when you found out." Elena's voice broke. "You had 6 months to reach out, to call, to send a letter. Instead, you hatched some elaborate plan to move back here and play the hero. Did it ever occur to you that I deserved the truth?" Sophia came running over, her face flushed with happiness. "Mama, did you see me? I made it all the way across without falling." Elena forced a smile, pushing her anger down where Sophia couldn't see it. "I saw, baby. You were amazing." She looked at David, her eyes cold. "We're leaving." "Elena, please." David said quietly. Let me explain. You've explained enough. She took Sophia's hand. Come on, sweetheart. It's time to go home. As they walked away, Elena could feel David's eyes on her back, but she didn't turn around. Couldn't turn around, because the moment she'd started to trust him again, the moment she'd considered letting him into their lives, he'd proven that he was still the same man who'd left her 8 years ago. A man who made decisions without her. A man who thought he knew what was best. A man who, when given the chance to be honest, chose manipulation instead. That night, after Sophia was asleep, Elena sat in her dark apartment and stared at her phone. David had called 7 times, left 6 voicemails, sent a dozen text messages, each one more desperate than the last. She deleted them all without listening. But as she sat there in the silence, one thought kept circling through her mind like a vulture. If he'd lied about knowing about Sophia, what else had he lied about? And more terrifying still, what if she'd already let him close enough to hurt not just her, but Sophia too? 2 months passed in bitter silence. Then, on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening, David showed up at the restaurant just as Elena was closing. She saw him through the window, standing in the downpour without an umbrella, and something in his posture made her unlock the door instead of walking away. He looked terrible. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. I'm selling the company, he said without preamble. Elena stared at him. What? The new one. The sustainable tech startup. I have buyers lined up. The deal closes next week. He stepped inside, water dripping onto her clean floors. I'm done trying to prove myself through success. I don't care about building empires anymore. David, I don't understand. You were right. About everything. His voice was raw. I spent 8 years chasing success because I thought that's what would make me worthy of you. But all it did was make me into someone who lies and manipulates to get what he wants. He took a shaky breath. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking for another chance. I'm just asking you to let me know my daughter, not as her father, just as someone who cares about her. Why are you selling your company? Because I finally understand what matters. And it's not money or success or proving anything to anyone. He looked at her with devastating honesty. I'd give up everything I've built for one real moment with Sophia. For the chance to be part of her life in whatever way you'll allow. Elena felt something crack open in her chest. You can't just throw away your dreams, David. They're not my dreams anymore, he said simply. They stopped being my dreams the moment I saw her. Before Elena could respond, her phone rang. The hospital. Her blood went cold. Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Monterey Bay Medical Center. Your daughter was brought in by ambulance about 20 minutes ago. There was an accident at her tutor's house. The world tilted. Elena's legs went weak and David caught her before she fell. What happened? Elena demanded, her voice breaking. Is she okay? She's stable, but she's asking for you. How soon can you get here? I'm coming right now. David's keys were already in his hand. My car. It's faster. They drove through the rain-slicked streets in terrified silence. Elena's hands shook so badly she couldn't fasten her seatbelt. David reached over and did it for her, his own hand surprisingly steady despite the fear in his eyes. She's going to be okay, he said, but his voice was tight. She has to be okay. At the hospital, they were directed to the pediatric wing. Elena ran down the corridor, David keeping pace beside her. Sophia was in a bed, her small body connected to monitors, a bandage wrapped around her head. Mrs. Patterson sat in the corner, sobbing. Baby, Elena gasped, rushing to her daughter's side. Sophia's eyes fluttered open. Mama. I fell down Mrs. Patterson's stairs. I hit my head really hard. Don't talk, sweetheart. Just rest. The doctor appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. Mrs. Rodriguez, can I speak with you privately? Elena's heart stopped. She looked at David, and without thinking, reached for his hand. He gripped it tightly. Whatever you need to tell me, you can say it in front of him. The doctor nodded. Sophia has a skull fracture. It's not life-threatening, but she's going to need surgery to relieve the pressure. The procedure is straightforward, but it's expensive. Do you have insurance? Elena's mind went blank. She had basic coverage, but she knew it wouldn't cover everything. The deductible alone would wipe out her savings. How much? she managed to ask. The doctor named a figure that made her stomach drop. "I have money," David said immediately. "I'll cover it." "All of it." "David, no. I can't let you do that." "She's my daughter," he said fiercely. "Let me do this. Please." Elena looked at him. This man who'd hurt her so deeply, who'd lied to her, who'd walked away once and could walk away again. But in his eyes, she saw something undeniable. Love. Raw, desperate, unconditional love for a child he barely knew. "Okay," she whispered. The surgery took 3 hours. Elena and David sat in the waiting room, not talking, just existing in the shared terror of potentially losing someone they both loved. When the surgeon finally emerged, smiling, Elena collapsed into David's arms and sobbed. "She's going to be fine," the doctor said. "She'll need to stay a few days for observation, but she's already asking for ice cream." Elena laughed through her tears. That night, as Sophia slept peacefully in her hospital bed, Elena and David stood by the window, watching the rain finally stop. "Thank you," Elena said quietly, "for being here, for helping her." "I would do anything for her," David replied. "For both of you." Elena turned to face him, seeing him clearly for the first time since he'd walked back into her life. Not as the boy who'd abandoned her, not as the man who'd lied, but as someone who, despite all his mistakes, was trying to be better. "I need to tell you something," she said, "about the day you left 8 years ago." David's breath caught. "What about it?" "I knew I was pregnant." The words came out in a rush. "I'd taken the test that morning. I was going to tell you that night. But then you got the call about the Silicon Valley opportunity, and you were so excited, and I couldn't bring myself to hold you back." "Elena," David breathed, his face stricken. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I loved you," she said simply. "And I knew if I told you, you'd stay. Not because you wanted to, but because you felt obligated. I didn't want to be your obligation, David. I wanted to be your choice." "You were always my choice," he said hoarsely. "Every day I was gone, every success I had, it all felt empty, because you weren't there to share it with me." "Then why didn't you come back?" "Because I was a coward," David admitted. "I was scared that I'd built this fantasy in my head, and that the real you wouldn't want the real me. So I kept building and building, thinking that if I became successful enough, impressive enough, I'd finally be worthy of you." Elena reached up and touched his face, feeling the tears on his cheeks. "You were always worthy, you idiot." He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in 8 years, Elena let herself fall. 6 months later, Elena stood in the kitchen of David's house on the hill, watching Sophia and David build a blanket fort in the living room. Their laughter drifted through the open doorway like music. Things had changed slowly, carefully, like two people learning to walk again after a devastating injury. David had sold his company just as he'd promised. He'd taken a consulting job that allowed him to work from home, to be present. He'd moved into Sophia's life gradually, earning every moment of her trust. And Elena had learned to let him in, not just into Sophia's life, but into hers. They hadn't rushed, hadn't tried to recapture what they'd lost. Instead, they'd built something new, something stronger, something forged in honesty instead of fantasy. "Mama, come see," Sophia called. "We made a castle." Elena walked into the living room and gasped in mock surprise at the elaborate structure of chairs and blankets. "It's magnificent," she said. "It has a dungeon and everything," Sophia said proudly. "Dad showed me how to make the towers stable." Dad. The word had started appearing 3 months ago, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. David had cried the first time he heard it. Elena had too, though she'd hidden in the bathroom so neither of them would see. "Can I talk to your mom for a minute?" David asked Sophia. "We'll come back and storm the castle after, okay?" "Okay." Sophia disappeared into her fort, already lost in her imaginary world. David led Elena out to the balcony overlooking the bay. The fog was rolling in, just like it had been that morning he'd walked back into her life. "I have something to tell you," he said, and Elena's heart stuttered with old fear. "What is it?" "I got a job offer. In Singapore. It's with a major clean energy firm. They want me to head their entire Asia-Pacific division. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. That's incredible, David. It would mean relocating for at least 3 years, possibly longer. He turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. I told them no. What? Why? Because I'm not leaving again. Not you, not Sophia, not this life we're building. He took her hands. I made that mistake once. I won't make it again. David, this is your career. This is everything you've worked for. No, he said firmly. Everything I've worked for is right here. You and Sophia, that's everything. Elena's eyes filled with tears. But you can't give up an opportunity like that. It's too big. Then come with me. The words hung in the air between them. What? Come with me. You, Sophia, all of us. We could make it work. You could open a restaurant in Singapore, or take a break, or do whatever you want. He squeezed her hands. I'm not asking you to give up your dreams for mine. I'm asking if we can dream together. Elena thought about her restaurant, the life she'd built, the safety and certainty of everything she knew. Then she thought about the last 6 months, about watching David and Sophia grow closer, about the way her heart had slowly, carefully opened again, about the nights David stayed late, helping with dishes while they talked about everything and nothing, about the way Sophia's face lit up when he walked through the door, about the way she'd fallen in love with him all over again, but deeper this time, truer this time. There's something you need to know, she said quietly. Before I answer. Anything. That call you made 8 years ago, the one your assistant said you'd return. She took a deep breath. You did call back. 3 hours later. I saw your name on my phone and I couldn't answer it. I was too scared, too proud, too convinced you'd already moved on. Tears streamed down her face. I let it go to voicemail. And then I deleted it without listening because I couldn't bear to hear you tell me goodbye. David's face crumbled. Elena, we both made choices that hurt each other, she continued. We were both scared and young and stupid, and we both paid the price. She cupped his face in her hands. But I don't want to be scared anymore. I don't want pride or fear to make my decisions. What are you saying? I'm saying yes, Elena whispered. Yes to Singapore. Yes to building a life together. Yes to taking the risk. She smiled through her tears. Yes to us. David pulled her into his arms and kissed her with 8 years of longing and loss and love, finally finding its way home. Behind them, the sliding door opened. Are you guys kissing? Sophia asked, her voice full of childish delight. Does this mean David is going to be my dad for real now? Elena and David broke apart laughing. He's already your dad, sweetheart, Elena said. He always was. So he's going to live with us? Actually, David said, crouching down to Sophia's level. We were thinking maybe we could all go on an adventure together. To a place called Singapore. It's far away, across the ocean. And they have the most amazing food and parks and museums. What do you think? Sophia's eyes went wide. Like a vacation? Like a home, Elena corrected. For a few years, at least. Sophia looked between them, her face serious. Then she broke into a grin that looked exactly like David's. Can I bring my stuffed turtle? You can bring whatever you want, David said, pulling her into a hug. Elena watched them together, father and daughter, and felt something settle in her chest, not the cautious hope she'd carried for months, not the protective fear that had defined her for years. Peace. 3 months later, Elena locked the door of Coastal Dreams for the last time. She'd sold the restaurant to her sous chef, ensuring it would stay in good hands. Her apartment was empty, her belongings packed and shipped ahead. At the airport, Sophia clutched her stuffed turtle in one hand and David's hand in the other, bouncing with excitement about the adventure ahead. David took Elena's hand as they walked toward their gate. No regrets? He asked quietly. Elena thought about the girl she'd been 8 years ago, pregnant and alone and terrified. She thought about the woman she'd become, strong and independent and capable of anything. She thought about the future stretching out before them, unknown and uncertain, and full of possibility. No regrets, she said. Only beginnings. As their plane lifted into the sky, Elena looked down at the small coastal town that had been her whole world. She'd built a life there from nothing. She'd raised a daughter there, She'd learned who she was and what she was capable of. But now it was time to learn who they could become together. The fog rolled in from the bay below, wrapping around the town like a goodbye. Elena pressed her hand against the window and smiled. Some endings, she'd learned, were really just beginnings in disguise. And some love stories took 8 years and a lifetime of mistakes to finally get right, but they were worth the wait. The end.